And I always was aware of this, but when I did some more research on him, I realized that he's not, he's more than central. He's the initiator of Impressionism. And he's the one who kept the group of artists together for as long as he did. Wait, wrong place, sorry. He's just an incredibly important figure. And I have to say that an incredible human being. One of the really exemplary human beings. And his generosity and his camaraderie were essential to the whole Impressionist enterprise, but also to how far and fast they developed. Because it's the Impressionist movement under his guidance was probably the most, the biggest collective movement of creative artists that we've ever seen. And it was what enabled them to break so much ground in such a short period of time. He himself is very interesting. He wasn't French. He never became French. He was actually born, okay, well, I should go back further. His father was a Jewish merchant. He was a French Jewish merchant of Jewish Portuguese origin, who went to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands to take over the dry goods business of an uncle after the uncle had died. And not only does he take over the business, but he takes over the wife as well, the widow. He marries his uncle's widow, which scandalized the small local Jewish community, because in Judaism, you're not supposed to marry your aunt. But they had apparently a very successful marriage with several children. The children, interestingly enough, were sent to an all-black elementary school, which may have had something to do with Pissarro's point of view. And during the time he was there, he seems to have, as a young man, he seems to have absorbed anarcho-syndicalist ideas, which he remained for his whole life an anarcho-syndicalist. And it was these ideas which caused him to act in, one of the reasons he acted in such a comradely way to all the other artists, and encouraged them to join together and work as a group. Anyway, at 12, he was sent to Paris. And while he was in Paris, he visited the Louvre a lot and began to paint. At 17, he comes back to St. Thomas, where he's supposed to help his father in his business. But he's not really interested in it, and he starts painting really a lot. And this is one of his paintings of St. Thomas.
Wow.
And he meets a French artist, Fritz Melby, who is there visiting St. Thomas, and they become friends, and Fritz encourages him to paint as much as he can. And he also invites him to join him on a trip to Venezuela. They end up going to Venezuela and painting there for 2 years. And Pissarro said of this, and Pissarro was about 19 when he did this. I abandoned all I had and bolted to Caracas to get clear of all the bondage of bourgeois life. So after 2 years, he comes back to St. Thomas, and his family is now resigned to the fact that he's going to be a painter, and lets him go to Paris. In Paris, he takes private classes at the École des Beaux-Arts. And for a while, he continues to paint pictures of St. Thomas, actually. Um, he becomes a copyist at the Louvre, and he also attends the Académie Suisse, a free studio where he meets a bunch of artists 10 years younger than him. You may know some of these: Claude Monet, Paul Cézanne, Armand Guillaumin, Renoir, Sisley, among others. And because he's 10 years older and has more experience than them, they listen to him. And I should add, when he first comes back to France, as well as studying at the Academy, he also studies with Corot. And so he also gets to know the Barbizon school painters and become quite intimate with them. And it's Corot who urges him to stop painting from nature in France. In 1860, he begins a relationship with his mother's maid and has a child, his first son, Lucien, and they get married later. And they end up having 7 children. He hangs out with the younger artists that he's met and debates them at Café Gerbois in Paris. They have fierce arguments about everything. And he argues really plausibly about for egalitarianism and against the institution of the salon and the inequities of the juries and the prizes. And he, even though he begins to have success at the salon, in fact, in 1868 he shows, and Émile Zola, the writer Émile Zola, who was a childhood friend of Cézanne's and becomes the leading realist writer in France, writes in the 1868 Salon exhibition, the last time, by the way, that Pissarro shows at the Salon. Zola writes, Camille Pissarro is one of the 3 or 4 true painters of the day. I have rarely encountered a technique that is so sure. But Cézanne is tired of the Salon, and he talks all these other young artists into showing separately. And they have their first impressionist exhibition, which is a failure, as are most of the impressionist exhibitions. But in the process of doing these exhibitions and painting together, they form a very tight group that evolves painting at it develops a new style of painting at a very fast rate. He settles in Pontoise, and he invites the other artists to come. He has Monet come and paint with him. And he takes Cézanne under his arm, and Cézanne will always be grateful to him. This is a nice contrast, by the way, to the tropical paintings, and a lovely early painting, which shows actually some of the influence of Corot. But it was around the time of the last painting and to this period that Cézanne was working with him a lot, staying with him, and actually for a while took residence in Dr. Gachet's house to be close to Pissarro. Dr. Gachet, if you remember, also was host to Vincent van Gogh in his last year. But in 1870, he and Monet and some of the other artists flee to London because of the Franco-Prussian War. And actually, he and Monet meet up there and take a very close look at J.M.W. Turner, and are very influenced by it. But this is one of his London paintings. He did a whole bunch of paintings in London, actually, but he found no market for them there. Back in France, again, you can see the influence of Corot at this point still. But back in France, he discovers, first of all, that 1,500 of his paintings were destroyed by troops who were billeted in his house. They used them to clean their boots. He has like about 20 paintings left. Anyway, they formed the first impressionist exhibition. As I said, it was pretty much of a failure. And the second one is actually hosted by the dealer Durand Ruel, who will become the dealer of the Impressionists. He doesn't do very well. And in fact, he's living out in the countryside, partly because he has no money, and his wife maintains a huge market garden so they can eat. This he showed in the second exhibition. It was ridiculed, but it's called Hoarfrost. And it's it looks like a late afternoon with hoarfrost on the ground, or maybe an early morning, and quite a lovely painting, I think. But the public didn't know how to look at it. Beautiful colors. So when he and Cézanne worked together, one of the interesting things about Pissarro is he didn't just teach them, he learned from them. And here he's done a portrait of Cézanne, but he's used Cézanne's style, the style that Cézanne was working in at the time. He encouraged Cézanne to move from his fantastical hallucinatory paintings to working from nature. And Cézanne actually copied a lot of Pissarro's paintings. And Cézanne was later to say of, much later to say of Pissarro, call him the humble and colossal Pissarro. He was grateful to him for the rest of his life. And we would not have the Cézanne we have without his interaction with Pissarro. Now, I show this Courbet because Courbet had quite a big impact on Pissarro. And this particular painting obviously had an influence on him because 10 years after he originally saw it, he paints this painting, all with a palette knife and a very similar composition, even though treated very differently with different lighting. It was also during this period that he was still working with Cézanne, who mostly painted in these days with a palette knife. So they were both playing with that. Now, because of financial difficulties, he actually moves to a very isolated region. And he starts to, you won't see it immediately after this, but he starts to pay more interest in the peasant life. This has always been one of my favorite of his. It's such a, the way you're seeing the houses through the branches of the trees, and there's this late autumn or winter light. By the way, if you have any observations, please chime in.
It doesn't seem to have as much contrast as you would think it would have, but it's beautiful. Otherwise, I'm just looking for contrast in the branches and shadows on the houses.
The thing about Pissarro is he has incredible range when you look at his whole body of work, and some exceptional paintings. He never went for effect in a really big way, which is his difference with Monet. Monet goes for the really powerful effects. Pissarro is subtle and gentle, but in Pissarro, you get a real sense of the earth, almost the odor and texture and of place, you know. It's a different sensibility. This was his market garden, actually, probably maintained by his wife. Nice snow scene. At this point, we're now into the late we're into 1879. At this point, he's actually working with Gauguin. And he and Gauguin had a lot in common because Gauguin spent a lot of his youth in Peru, his family being part Peruvian. And the two of them would actually dress up as gauchos together. They had a really good time together. But Gauguin is the one artist who, in developing his own style, didn't influence Pissarro. Pissarro didn't want to go where Gauguin was taking painting.
What's gaucho mean?
Gaucho, it's cowboys from the Argentina and states near Argentina. Very distinct outfits with huge sombreros.
Tell you.
Excuse me?
Cassandra knows.
Cassandra?
I am from Peru.
Yes, right, right.
Yeah, and like the ponchos, the like
Yeah.
one poncho.
Very colorful ponchos, huge
Yeah.
sombreros, a very a swashbuckling kind of manner. I think they both enjoyed pretending to be gauchos. They probably both, I'm sure they both spoke Spanish. I mean, it's interesting. The Impressionism is also the moment when the art becomes internationalized in France. And not just internationalized, but a number of women, and I'll be talking about that soon. A number of women are become part of the movement. The egalitarianism which Pissarro, which was partly already in the air in France during these days, but which Pissarro encouraged among the group, led to this embrace of a real variety of people. This one feels really cold to me. It makes me shiver just to look at it. The people don't look very comfortable either.
Paris?
Yes, the outskirts of Paris, yes. And the lighting in it is very interesting. He does some very lovely ones too. And you can see, now this is, let's see, I'm looking at, this would also have been around the time that he was working with Gauguin. And if you look at, we'll be looking at Gauguin's Brittany paintings, and some of this palette Gauguin picks up on. He just exaggerates it considerably more. But also, Pissarro is working with Gauguin. He's also starting to paint the peasants and compositions with peasants in them, which Gauguin also picks up on and does this in Brittany and takes that practice to the tropics with him.
This is like I've seen in Van Gogh, but or Gauguin as well, but just the higher angle or wide angle lens kind of.
Yeah, well, some writers suggest that Degas had an influence on this, because Pissarro knew everyone, and he kept in contact with everyone, and drew them in.
I like seeing the sort of distorted chairs and the table. So it really adds to it. It's really interesting. Yeah,
at this point, actually, Mary Cassatt, Degas and Mary Cassatt had joined the group who was showing in one of the last of the Impressionist exhibitions. And, so his close contact with them probably partly inspired this particular view. It's a very good painting, though.
All the textures and the paint.
Yeah, and the way he's handled the stuff on the table here too is lovely.
Is it palette knife work? I was I love it.
I think it's very generous brushwork. I think he pretty much abandoned the palette. It might be, though. I'm not 100% sure. He's breaking up his color into smaller and smaller strokes, though.
Mm-hmm.
This one, I have to apologize for the stuff on the side here. I couldn't find this size in any other form. I think it's a lovely painting he's getting into just these paintings of daily life. in the countryside and in the markets. He does a whole number of them, and I think some of them are quite beautiful. These would have been done from sketches on site, not in the studio. They wouldn't have been done on site.
That's what I was going to ask you. Probably did sketches and then from memory colors.
Yeah, he might have had people pose for him. I imagine he did. For some of the figures, others he would have just taken little drawings that he used and assembled them in the studio. At this point, he's met Signac and Seurat, the pointillists, and his son, Lucien Pissarro, who's also a painter. In fact, all of his children were painters, but Lucien remained one his whole life. Lucien was fascinated by pointillism, so Pissarro, being the kind of person he was, started doing pointillist paintings. And I think this is quite a nice one, actually. He also did this one, which is, I think, is stunning.
Wow, it really is. Like, it's just white, but you can see so much texture.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of color, and it's not,
yeah.
It's these very, very subtle tints, which make it, the whole thing vibrate, There's a very subtle, warm, cool. If you look in here, you see little bits of orange, and then in the water, there's kind of a pinkish orange and a blue. Very, very subtle, though. But he finally, he did pointillism for 4 years, and then he finally said that it was impossible to be true to my sensations and consequently to render life and movement. And he abandons it. But it has an effect on his work. His colors become more subtle, his brushwork, in the mixing of colors is more subtle in the way he interacts, the colors interact. I think this is a lovely mood piece, very simple. And this is not pointillist, but it almost looks like it could be, because some of his figure paintings he would work and rework for years. Okay, so in 1896, he sees Monet's, they're no longer working together, but they're still friends, but he sees Monet's cathedral paintings, round cathedral paintings. And what he likes is so many of paintings with the changing light and the paintings being in a series. So he actually starts, because he now has a problem with his eyes where they're very sensitive to light and wind, and he starts to paint from windows in hotels, and he starts to do series. But it's interesting, he doesn't pick something really simple like Monet, because he's interested in working people in the workaday world. So he picks a very busy scene. And this is in Rouen. He did several. At the moment, I'm just showing you a few, and they're not from the same series. But they're still very interesting paintings. And then he does the same thing in Paris. And these are the ones that I think are exceptional. He does a series of the Boulevard Montmartre. Here is in the winter, in fog, same view. In the spring, at night. Lovely, and there's more to this series, actually. And at this point, by the way, he'd had in 1891, he had a very successful show, the first time, a retrospective with Durand Ruel. And he's now making money off his paintings after starving most of his life. So he's doing these series for the market now. But I'm going back through them once more because I think they're lovely to see them in sequence. It's also interesting that a man who spent most of his life painting countryside suddenly takes on the city and does such a wonderful job with it.
I love the smokestacks.
Oh yeah, in some of them, yes, like
Yeah.
in this one. Yeah.
Hmm.
I've only ever seen his cityscapes, Parisian, urban stuff, and he's incredible. But I had no idea that he came from a background of a rural nature painter.
Yeah, and that's what all the Impressionists began as. And then many of them went to the urban thing and then went back to nature. Monet goes back to nature at the end, but Pissarro goes the other direction. And this is very late. This is finished just a couple of years before his death, but probably started a long time before. Remember, he's still, when he does these cityscapes, he's staying in a hotel in Paris or in Rouen. His family is out in the country. So while he's painting these pictures, he's writing reams of letters to his wife and kids, especially to Lucien, telling him what he's up to. But I think this is quite a lovely painting too. He did a series with this view. I'm just showing you one of them. But there's the Louvre in the distance there.
I love that the tree branches on the upper right aren't fussed over at all.
Right, right.
Mhm.
Well, he is an impressionist. This is painted in the last year of his life. He did a whole bunch of self-portraits, by the way, but probably to give to one of his kids. But a lovely self-portrait, very thoughtful, and a person who feels like he's at peace. But I have to say, one of the things about his paintings that strikes me is there's never a sense of struggle in his work. There's this very relaxed, fresh feeling to all of his work. So his son, Lucien, was a painter also who immigrated to England, stayed there because he married an English woman. He went to England actually because of the crafts movement under William Morris and stayed there. And he was an illustrator and a painter. But in doing a little research on him, I discovered something that was kind of interesting. That painting, that's Dorset. That's the county I come from in England.
Oh, wow.
And this was done in 1915. But he died actually in 1944 on his father's birthday at 81.
81. Wow.
Yeah. He lived 10 years longer than his father, who died. Camille died at 71.
So I'm
A
sure
nice
it's all
painting.
countryside full of houses now.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I'm sure all this is covered in houses now.
No, Dorset.
No.
Dorset is the prettiest part of England still.
Oh, nice.
Dorset, they really protect it. It's a very popular site for Londoners to come to. So they really protect the countryside. They have strict rules about the kind of stone you can use to build your houses, all kinds of stuff. It's not heavily developed.
Not at all.
And this is actually a good rendition of it feels like Dorset to me. However, you can see now for a while Lucien was a pointillist and on the leading edge, the avant-garde, but he didn't continue that way. And though I think this is a very good painting, I don't feel there's any advance over what his father was doing here. But I thought I add it because it's an interesting postscript, and I couldn't resist because it's Dorset, right? A lot of green there. You have to really know your greens to paint in Dorset.
Right.
So anyway, that's my talk on Pissarro, who's really the father of Impressionism. Mary Cassatt said, Pissarro was such a good teacher. he could teach the stones to paint.